While studying the Quran, it is impossible not to discern Muhammad's hatred for the Judaized Arabs. This is reflected by his followers' attitude throughout the centuries and into the 21st. What were his reasons?
It is important that we first explain the expression itself. Anti-Semitism is the prejudice against or hostility toward Jews as a group. The prejudice or hostility is usually characterized by a combination of religious, racial, cultural, and ethnic biases. While the term's etymology might suggest that anti-Semitism is directed against all Semitic peoples, this is totally incorrect. The word was coined in Europe specifically against the Jews, who were the only non-European group. Hence Muhammad, who hated the Judaized Arabs, was anti-Semitic, and so are most of the Muhammadans, whether Arab or not. As we explained in our chapter 6a and b about Muhammad's two periods of concocting his Quran, while in Mecca, his verses reflected great respect and admiration for the Jews, whom he invariably called the people of the book. The book being the Hebrew Bible, since the Gospel spoke of the sonship and or divinity of Jesus, hence representing kufr. I must point out as many times as necessary that all the records that are available to humanity regarding Muhammad, his Quran and the Hadiths are totally one-sided, coming only from his followers. We have not got a single independent record to substantiate or support these reports. Muhammad and his followers show us, based upon their own testimony, that they forced into conversion, subjugated, enslaved and or slaughtered most of the Judaized Arabs as well as the Christian and pagan Arabs, their records and their books. We have absolutely nothing but Muhammad's and his followers' words that are as real and reliable as the mirage of the Arabian desert. After 13 years of exhortation in Mecca, Muhammad failed miserably to make any impact upon his own people, the tribe of Quraysh. 13 years of hard effort yielded the abysmal number of 78 followers, most of whom were close friends and slaves, both male and female. When he first arrived at Medina, the Judaized Arabs considered him a brother monotheist who was attempting to bring forth the concept of a one and only God to pagan Arabia. Please always remember that the Judaized Arabs as well as the Christian Arabs were natives of the peninsula centuries before Muhammad and his Quran. They were ethnic Semitic Arabs, not outsiders to the land. They had converted without coercion to the faith of the Jews or to Christianity. Moreover, the pagan Arabs settled their differences mostly by single combat and not by attacking in hordes and or armies. The Judaized and Christian Arabs had allies among the pagan Arabs. Both the Judaized and Christian Arabs supported their own allies among the pagans and fought accordingly. According to what we can glean from the Muhammadan records, both the Jews and Christians were mostly in agriculture, trade and manufacturing, and allied themselves with the pagans because of intermarriage as well as for political and security necessities. More relevant of all, there was no hatred for either the Judaized or the Christian Arabs. Both were totally Arabized people who were indistinguishable from any others except for their beliefs and some traditions. The vile hatred and discrimination came as a result of Muhammad and his Quran. For the first 16 to 18 months, while among the Judaized Arabs of the Medina, Muhammad did his best to ingratiate himself with them, to the extent that he observed and instructed his followers to do the same, the Yom Kippur day of fasting, as well as praying with the Qibla towards the Sham or the direction of Jerusalem. The relationship would have continued to be amicable had Muhammad not started on the path of war and aggression. Ladies and gentlemen, only by studying, and I repeat studying, the historical records of Muhammad and Islam can anyone read between the lines and pick up the truthful nuggets of gold or of gems hidden within. The records are numerous, extensive, and are available for any who have the time and make the effort to study them. Never take the self-serving words of the so-called scholars of Islam for granted, since it is not to their advantage to reveal the facts. We listen to and read what they say, but do our research and come up with our own conclusions. You should do the same. The Judaized and Christian Arabs were agriculturists, manufacturers and or traders who could only operate properly if there is no conflict in the peninsula. the Meccans depended on trade and pilgrimage to make their living. That is exactly why they had the very definite rules for the conduct of war or conflict that were rarely, if ever, violated by the pagans, the majority of the Arabs. Muhammad, on the other hand, formed the first organized crime syndicate in Arabia, with Medina as its base and the caravans of the Arabs, their villages and herds as their target. This was against the required stability of the peninsula for trade and commerce. The Medina Jews, I'm using for ease of terminology, became apprehensive and upset. Muhammad and his followers became the consummate pirates of the desert, ambushing, pillaging, slaughtering and enslaving any and all those pagans they could, even breaking the forbidden months prohibitions. To add insult to injury, Muhammad wanted the Jews to believe in him as the last prophet of Allah and to follow his belief system. This was the last straw, since he and his Quran were not offering anything new or relevant to add to their extensive religious beliefs. In fact, they chided Muhammad for misrepresenting and misunderstanding many of their concepts, precepts, and historical leaders. Muhammad, who was doing his best to impress upon his mostly illiterate, superstitious, and ignorant followers that he was actually the promised Messiah of the Jews and Christians, could not tolerate such obvious and dangerous people who were exposing his weaknesses and foibles. After about 16 months, Muhammad started directing his wrath totally against the Jews. He redirected the Qibla towards the pagan Kaaba and stopped the fast of Ashura and instituted the month of Ramadan instead. His Quranic verses became more and more hateful, strident, and uncompromising. Furthermore, he started the first case of ethnic cleansing in the Arabian Peninsula. Every time he wanted to victimize a tribe, he declared that he received the usual convenient revelation from Allah, allowing him to do whatever he was intending to do. He was actually sanctifying all his nefarious deeds. The Muhammadan records exalt him for having destroyed first the 3 major Jewish tribes of Medina. This was followed by Khaybar and others. At the same time, he and his followers were slaughtering, enslaving, plundering and raping pagan Arabs as well as Christian ones. By the year 636, almost all the Judaized and Christian Arabs were either converted, enslaved, or forced out of most of the Arabian Peninsula, their native land, even unto today, 1400 years later. The Quran and Hadith are full of verses that show virulent hatred for the Jews. That is why, even though 1,400 million followers of Muhammad may have never seen or known a Jew hate the Jews, because of the Quran and Muhammad's Sunnah. Listen to our chapter 16. Ladies and gentlemen, so-called believers and unbelievers, please be aware that Muhammad in his Quran shows a relentless and eternal hatred not only for the Jews, but also for all other human beings who do not believe as he does. All Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, animists, etc. Listen to our chapters 14, 19, 22, 137 and get enlightened. After listening to all of the above, you will find out that Muhammad and his Quran are the ultimate, universal, but equal opportunity hate-mongering duos.